Is November the 13th. This is the book of Revelation, and we are in chapters 17, 18, and the first part of 19, if we get that far. Okay. So anyway, we've covered a lot of Revelation so far. We made it through all the judgments. And before I forget, I need to spend about 15 minutes talking about the paper that all of the students must complete in 2 weeks. So I'd like to start off with that while I still remember to do it. It'll be a learning experience for you. You can breathe a sigh of relief, but you'll actually learn something also. I was going to give you like choices on what you could do it on, but I've decided against that. I think what I'm going to do is, like in my other classes, I'm going to just have a theme of like sticking with the chronology of the book. So what I would like you to write about is, since you already wrote about the 7 churches, we're going to skip the first 2,000 years of the book of Revelation, and we're just going to focus on the 7 years, and that's all. We're not going to focus on heaven or anything like that. We just want to focus on the 7-year period, called Daniel's 70th week, the time of Jacob's trouble. And so here's what I'm looking for. And if I'll tell you what I'm looking for, and then if you have questions during the hour, you can raise your hand, like, when I'm lecturing and stuff like that, and ask pointed, distinct questions that will help you with your paper, okay? What I am looking for the chronology is that you are going to write about chapter 6. So let me write that down. Chapters... Chapter 6, eight, 9, and 16. And if you recognize those, this is the seals, this is the trumpets, and this is the bowls. So basically, you're going to be going through the 7-year period, and you're just going to, what I'd like you to do is just describe what each judgment is. And if you had, if you took notes before, in previous classes where I was writing up, the seal judgments, if you can just remember that the 6th seal, here's seal number 6, like right after the midpoint of the tribulation, that starts the day of the Lord. So the 6th seal and the 7th seal, talks about the day of the Lord, and I would like, just have you mention that, that the 6th seal and the 7th seal is the day of the Lord, but then also be sure to note that the 7th seal includes all 7 trumpets and all 7 bowls. So in other words, the 7th seal is all the rest of the judgments during that time. And then when you get to the 7th trumpet, the 7th trumpet is the 7 bowl judgments. So remember I gave you that picture, that kind of, and if you want me to draw that later again to just refresh your memory, I'll do it during the 3 hours tonight, because when what we talk about tonight is really what's happening during the 7th bowl. So, and then one more thing, that the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th trumpets is respectively the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd woe. It rhymes with my name, No. Okay? So, trumpets number 5, 6, and 7. Trumpets 5, 6, 7 is woe number 1, number 2, and number 3. If you would mention those things, so that way when you're going through what the judgments are, you're just saying how to identify them. You know that they're called by different things. There might be one important question that you might have, and that's how long is this supposed to be? I figure for each judgment, there's 21 judgments, or let's say 19 judgments. I figure 1 page per judgment should do it. So 19 pages. Okay, just kidding. So I can't even. It's very difficult to get a rise out of the students because they don't believe anything I say anymore. 2 to 3 pages. 2 to 3 pages. If you can do it in 2 pages, I will be highly surprised. But just choose your words carefully. If it runs over 3 pages, that's okay. But try to keep it down a little bit. Okay. In other words, you really don't have to write 9 or 10 pages to make sure you get an A or something like that. As I look at somebody in particular there. Yes?
Is that 8 through 16 or 8, 9?
Oh, it's chapter 6, chapters 8 and 9. I'm sorry, yeah. And sharp eye. I mean, I would be noticing that too, yeah. And so chapter 6, chapters 8 and 9, and chapter 16. But if you want to read about the 7th, say, trumpet, you have to go to chapter 11 because that's where it's actually mentioned. So you're feverishly looking for the 7th trumpet. You'll see it in chapter 11. So if I do 11 and 16, because the 7th trumpet is mentioned in the first part of that chapter. So that's just so that you know where it is. And all I'm asking you to do, just to show that you see that, because it covers the whole chronology, you can mention, that seals 1 through, in particular, seals 1 through 4, but you can say 5 also. You might want to mention, just to show your expertise in the judgments, that seal number 5. You can put down that seal number 5 is the death of the it's not the death of the martyrs, but the context is the death of the martyrs, and that for seal number 5 is covering the entire length. Or if you don't believe that, you can say at the very least it covers just the Great Tribulation. And the seal itself isn't the death of the martyrs like so many Bible commentators say. Seal number 5 is the prayers of the dead martyrs who are saying, "How long, O Lord, before you judge those who killed us?" That's the judgment, because when God answers their prayers, that's the actual judgment for seal number 5. So if you want to, make sure you note that. Any questions on what the paper is going to be about? Nothing? Austin? Max? Jeff? I only got 4 papers to read. So if you want to make it 4 pages, it's okay.
20, right?
What?
So make it 20?
No. When I had a really large Genesis class, I had some really enthusiastic students, and it wasn't unusual to get, I said 6 to 8 pages. I made them way longer back then. It was not unusual to get 13, 14, 15 pages. Yeah. And they were really good papers too.
Sure.
Yeah. But they just don't need to be that long. Okay. Okay, so everybody, does anybody else have any questions? Like, how about when it's due? Would that be a good question?
Huh? You said 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks, yeah. So 2 weeks would be...
Thanksgiving.
Huh? Well, it would be...
The last week of class, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be due the last week of class, and also your next class session, which you won't be here. I will probably, since I have all of you in other classes. I will probably pass out your final, which will be a take-home also. I'll pass that out to you in another class, and it will be due the last session also. My last final in Revelation was 100 questions. I'm going to cut it down, okay, to fewer questions. So keep it down about 90 or something like that, okay. Okay, so just to let you know that don't be surprised that, you know, when you're either in the Pentateuch or you're in Old Testament survey, that you'll get your test on Revelation 2. So if you can't find your final test for Revelation, just remember it's probably within your notes in another class. That's all you'd have to remember. Okay. So no other questions on what we're going to do? Okay. So we have, okay, so doesn't it make you wish so you were, I mean, you're welcome to do these if you want.
Oh, that's perfectly
Okay.
all right.
Okay.
I've been there, done that.
Okay. Okay.
Still have nightmares about college.
Oh, okay. You know, my 9 years in the military, I never had post-traumatic stress disorder, but when I finished my master's degree, I still have nightmares. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we are in Revelation chapter 17, and when I'm going through Revelation 17, I'm going to cover it in such a way that I'm going to do a contrast between Revelation chapters 13, 12, and like say Daniel chapters 6 and 7 and stuff. But I might leave the Daniel chapter out just because I can't draw that many dragons and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do, I just want to contrast the ones in Revelation and just realize the one in Daniel just gives a little bit more information. I mean, other information that isn't necessarily in the book of Revelation. So you'll discover, once you understand the 7 heads and the 10 horns, once you understand those, you're just gonna see things change here. When it talks about crowns, crowns like in Revelation 12 and 13, the crowns will either be on the heads or the horns. But when we get to Revelation 17, you're going to notice there are no crowns. So that'll be a difference. So what I'm striving for here is like a big picture when I give you all three of the wicked beasts. Okay, is that my phone? Or
That's mine. I'm
is
sorry.
that yours? Okay. Is it telling me it's time for a break?
No, it's like somebody's texting me, and so I get it on the phone, and then
Oh,
a second
okay.
later I get it on the iPad. It's like, okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, so in Revelation chapter 17, and the best way to go through this is to read it slowly and then kind of like comment on certain things to help you get the big picture. So we'll go through what Revelation 17 says first, and then as necessary, I'll go back and make a contrast between chapters 12 and 13. Okay? And then, of course, any questions up to this point of anything you have in Revelation, you're welcome to go ahead and ask. Because we're at that point now where if there's anything that's hindering you from understanding the flow of the book up to this point, we want to go ahead and cover that now while we're going through new material. Okay, so Revelation chapter 17. And this is going to be, by the way, it's going to be a 2-chapter section, Revelation 17 and 18, and it's going to talk about religious Babylon, chapter 17, and it's going to talk about the economic, social order in the world, which will be chapter 18. So it's going to be a political, economic, and religious system, chapter 17 and 18, parallel to Isaiah chapters 13 and 14 and Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51. They're all like 2 major blocks of chapters in those 3 books, and they all talk about, they're both double chapters that talk about the destruction of Babylon. I mean, the destruction of Babylon is so important that God has a lot of chapters in the Bible devoted to it. Whereas the formation of Babylon, Revelation chapter 10, 10 and 11, where it talks about the Tower of Babel. We have that, and we're going to discover, I'm going to teach a view that teaches the revived, the rebuilding of the city of Babylon, and Antichrist's headquarters, or at least the major capital in the world, is going to actually be in Babylon, where the Tower of Babel was, because God is going to judge Babylon in total destruction right where it began. Okay, and I will mention, like other views, like a lot of commentators talk about the capital of the Antichrist empire as being Rome, or revived Rome. In other words, the city of Rome itself. A lot of commentators say that. And what I'm going to do is, because of Revelation 17, demonstrate that it's a system that permeates the entire world, but yet the headquarters itself is actually going to be in Babylon itself. So when it talks about the 7 hills, there's a lot of commentaries that will name the 7 hills of Rome and stuff like that. I am not going to do that. I used to make a joke about that, and I would say there's a lot of cities around the world that have 7 hills. They're built on 7 hills. For instance, Cleveland, Ohio, and I would name the 7 hills of Cleveland, Ohio. But
Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires. I don't know the 7 hills of Buenos Aires, but I did know them for Cleveland, Ohio at one time. I have a cousin that lives in Cleveland, so anyway. Chapter 17. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." Okay, before I go any farther, does everybody here know what a harlot is? Okay, it's the great prostitute. Okay, God calls the religious system of the world the great prostitute. And when you read about false religion and idolatry in the Old Testament, most of the time it is pictured as being a prostitute, and it'll even describe Israel or Judah as prostitutes, and those who commit fornication with her as committing adultery. In other words, if you're God's people and you're involved in the system, you're committing adultery against God. In fact, it's the major theme of the book of Hosea. So anyway, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So remember that phrase, the inhabitants of the earth, refers to unbelievers. Those people who were not sealed, in other words, they're not part of the elect, sealed from the foundation of the world. Those in Revelation, the inhabitants of the earth, always, without exception, refers to unbelievers. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So, as we start this chapter, it's it's kind of like going into in like a new vision. It's a prelude. It's background information that is describing what has just been destroyed in the 7th bowl in Revelation chapter 16. For instance, in Revelation chapter 16, right at the end for the 7th bowl, it states, starting at verse 17, then the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. Now the great city was divided into three parts, referring to Jerusalem, and the cities of the nations fell, okay, and great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath, referring to Psalm 75 verse 8. Then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, and great hail from heaven fell upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent, i.e. 75 pounds. In other words, picture yourself, if you're an unbeliever, you're running on the earth, you're trying to find shelter from the hailstorm, but each chunk of hail weighs about 75 pounds each. So the great hail from heaven fell upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent. Men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, since that plague was exceedingly great. Okay, remember, this is very well taking place in the dark. I mean, remember, all of the bowl judgments happen in fairly rapid succession, and so you can picture it being dark. The oceans are dead, and the men are. People are full of boils and sores, very cancerous type things, and they're in pain already, and now they have to run for their lives because now coming out of the sky there's 75-pound blocks of ice coming down, and I seriously doubt if they're cube-shaped and smooth. They're probably wicked looking and jagged and everything, and probably because they come through the atmosphere, it could be razor sharp in certain areas and stuff. So it's a tremendous plague that happens during that time, but the key verse here, and great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. That's verse 19. I didn't read it last time. I'm going to go ahead and turn to Psalm 75, verse 8.
What was the second you just read there?
Revelation 16, verse 19. Because everything in chapters 17 and 18 is during the seventh bowl.
Gotcha.
Okay. So in Psalm 75, the very last verse of the psalm, it says, when it talks about the cup, it says, "For in the hand of Jehovah there is a cup, and the wine is red. It is fully mixed, and he pours it out. Surely its dregs shall all the wicked of the earth drink or drain and drink down." It's referring to that cup. But by the way, the verse just before that, it says, "But God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another." It mentions God being the judge. In other words, God is judging the earth. And then he talks about, kind of picture, like you see these movies, David Guzik's expression, let the movie run in your head. Somebody grabbing somebody's head and their mouth is being forced open, and the contents of this cup is literally being forced down their throat. Picture that as, God says they will drink that cup all the way down to the dregs. In other words, if you ever had a glass of wine or something like that, the particles that are at the bottom of the bottle or something like that, all of those things are going down the person's throat. So that's the picture that God wants you to see there.
Jim,
Yes.
is that when it talks about Babylon and being such a great city and making all the merchants rich and that, so it was obviously built before the tribulation begins? Because once all these judgments take place, it will be destroyed. So
Yeah, I would be looking for, now this is just me personally, and especially when Saddam Hussein, probably a lot of you people, younger, the regular college students here wouldn't remember this, but some of us, when we were younger, they'd talk about the city of Babylon you know, they didn't talk about it being rebuilt because, you know, basically just nothing was happening there. It was just, I mean, the major city, what's the capital of Iraq? Oh, come on. Baghdad, yeah. You think of Baghdad, like, you know, 60 miles toward the northeast. But there was really nothing in Babylon itself. A few tourists would be going out there to see the remains of the Tower of Babel and part of Nebuchadnezzar's palace being excavated and stuff. But when Saddam Hussein was there, he was literally pouring several $1 billion into the reconstruction of the old city and rebuilding part of the ziggurat, you know, the Tower of Babel itself, like it was going to be a tremendous tourist attraction because it was just one of those major things that everybody in the world has heard about, and they'd all be making trips to Babylon in order to see where the first great major civilization on the earth was. Even though if you're, say, an evolutionist, you might believe that civilization first occurred in Africa, all those, of course, who are Muslim and Christian and Jewish would all say, of course, that the first civilization was in Babylon. Okay, so I would look for a lot of work being done there in the city, and realize that a boomtown or a city can be built very quickly when they want to, and when God, say, puts it in the mind of the world to build a city, maybe some economic crisis, and we don't know why or how, the scripture doesn't say. Could you open the door again? It's getting really hot in here. And who is it that knows how to reset the temp? Could you reset the temperature? I mean, when I'm getting hot up here, because I know when I talk, the hot air goes out and it hits you guys, but okay, let's kind of cool it off in here. Anyway, it's when you read economic experts and their opinions and stuff, you know, a good many of them will say that it's the perfect place to have a world capital because of the oil fields, the wealth, the access to waterways and stuff like that. You know, the Persian Gulf, everything is close by. It's built on the river Euphrates. The Euphrates being a major river in the world. So it's a really good place to have an economic capital of the world, and geographically it's really close to the center of the world. Geographically, remember, pretty much from where it is, it's right in the middle of Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so geographically, it's just a good location for a world capital. And so Antichrist is going to do that. Okay, and I probably won't spend a lot of time talking about Rome. I used to all the time, but I'm probably going to be really literal and just say that when God is referring to Babylon, he means Babylon. Okay, but if you read commentaries in the 60s and 70s, Babylon meant Rome, and sometimes Babylon meant New York. People tried to make arguments that New York was, we were the new Babylon. Okay, so anyway, it talks about this woman riding on a beast. Okay, so it's one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls. Okay, he's introducing this vision to John, and first of all, the woman sits on many waters, and I'm going to let the scripture itself give us the interpretation of it. Okay, and then you can ask me to interpret the interpretation for you. Okay, because when I read what the vision says, John had a question, and then of course John had to have it interpreted. I would like to mention first though that the word mystery says, mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. The word mystery, it's the Greek word mysterion, and a mystery in the Greek means that it's something that was previously unknown, but was revealed through divine revelation so that now you know what it is. But the ultimate explanation for the mystery itself will be for the people who are living through it. So in other words, we can get a broad idea of what it's talking about, but we won't really understand the unique form that Mystery Babylon will take because the scripture's not that explicit. So you're going to see a lot of, when the scripture's not really explicit, even among fundamentalists, you'll see a lot of explanations. Like some of the earlier ones were like, it's the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope is the Antichrist. In the 70s, it was the ecumenical movement, all the religions coming, all the Protestant denominations coming back to Rome, and of course of course it fits so well because if you use Latin, the Pope is the vicar of Christ. Well, vicar is Latin for, the Greek is anti. So in other words, the Pope is the Antichrist. But anti means two things. Anti means against. In other words, it could mean against Christ, but also means in place of or instead of. So anti means, it has two definitions. It means in place of or against. Both of those definitions fit. And by the way, the two beasts in Revelations 13, one of them is clearly against Christ and the other one is in place of Christ. The first beast is against. He's blaspheming the God of heaven, but the beast that was the lamb with the two horns that spoke like a dragon, he was in place of Christ. So in other words, it took two beasts to fully counterfeit the ministry of Jesus Christ. So mysterion, or mystery, in the Greek and in the Bible is something that God has revealed, but yet the full way that this mystery religion the shape it's going to take will not be clearly seen until the Great Tribulation. How all the religions of the world are going to come together in that one religion, we will not know, and we'll never know. But people on earth will not know until they're living through it. Today, it is very fashionable to say that, it's really Islam. In other words, the strong emphasis on Islam. Well, how do we know? Because when they kill people, they decapitate, and they're doing lots of things. The brutality that they have. Now people are talking about ISIS, kind of like reviving the ancient Assyrian Empire, known for its brutality. Right now, there is a systematic effort by ISIS in Syria and Iraq to exterminate every Christian. So like we're coming close to the time where for the first time in 2,000 years, there will be no Christians in that area. And they're down to about, like in Mosul, they're down to like 40,000 or something like that. They have three choices. They can leave the country, or they can convert to Islam, or they can die. That's their choices, which has always been the choices for Islam, okay? It's either you confess that Allah is Lord, or Allah is God, or if you don't confess, you die. By the way, if you're a Christian and a Jew, you have the opportunity to confess. If you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or something like that, you don't even get that option. You just die. People of the book, the Bible, have the option to convert to Islam. But anybody else who is not of the book, in other words, if you're not Jewish, if you're not Christian, the penalty is death. In the Quran, the penalty for being not people of the book is extermination, and that's for the whole world. So that, by the way, in the Quran, that is the goal of Islam, is to make the entire world Islam. Those that don't convert are to be exterminated.
Is there a leader of ISIS?
I don't know enough about ISIS to really know, because mostly I just hear about the organization itself. But they're the first terrorist group that have ever claimed territory. In other words, they're starting to say they're their own nation. They're forging out their own territory right now, so that they have a base, so that they can to make first the rest of the Islamic world part of their kingdom, and then ultimately the rest of the world itself. That's kind of like their goal right now. One of the great, by the way, we are now living in an age where there are more Christians dying than there were in the first century. In other words, and the world is totally silent. And I was just reading Israel, My Glory. It's a Christian Zionist, in other words, Jews that believe that Israel has the right to exist. They call that Christian Zionism. It's understandable that non-Christians don't care whether Christians are being put to death. But what's baffling is the fact that Christians themselves don't seem to care. So like, hundreds of thousands are being persecuted and put to death all over the world. And like say in the top 50 country, most of them being Muslim, they're being systematically slaughtered. But yet nothing is said. I mean, the media is almost totally quiet. And it's like there are thousands upon thousands being killed. I mean, even when in the center in Africa, Muslims are coming in. Not only were they mutilating Christians, but they were actually taking Christians and they were selling them off as slaves. And of course, that's the part of the black area in Africa, and even the black leaders here in America didn't seem to care. And it was like a revival of slavery. Not that slavery ever died out, but they were making slaves, and they're making slaves of black people in Africa, but yet it's not even an issue here in the United States. And why any black person would want to be Islamic when they believe in slavery. Again, whether you're black or whether you're a woman, I'm baffled why any woman would want to become a Muslim, because the view of women in Islam is they are so unimportant that they're on the level of cattle. There's nothing in the Quran that even says if a woman will ever make it to heaven, because there is no woman that's smart enough. The only women in heaven that are ever talked about are the 70 pure virgins that are for the martyrs, who die, killing as many enemies as they can. And they're not like they're real women. Their bodies are crystal clear. You can see through them. So they're not. It's like heaven for the martyr is eternal bliss and sexuality. That's the Muslim idea of the glories of heaven. Much like Mormonism, by the way, they have much in common, Mormonism and Islam, when it comes to the idea of heaven. So anyway, there's a whole lot of views on what this mystery religion is going to take like. But just today, the commentaries you read, they're all liking to say that there's a strong Islamic element, and the proof is that because of the way they kill people, the way they mutilate people, it's a revival of what the old ancient Assyrian Empire used to do. Okay, so just to get those things straight, when John sees this woman, he is just utterly mystified. This woman was just so dazzling to look at. He was like, his mouth fell open. He just hardly knew how to express himself. He was just awestruck by her appearance. So anyway, she's this beautiful woman. She's dressed in very gaudy. You have to picture her as being like, I always picture her as being like Jezebel, how right before she died, she puts on her thick red lipstick and stuff like that and her makeup before she's tossed out the window. Well, this woman is like riding the beast, but she's an incredibly beautiful woman. Okay, she's wearing extremely rich garments. All the garments that are described for her are only for royalty and the very wealthy. So in other words, it's like she's the epitome of what humanism and religion, apart from God, is looking for. Okay, but the one thing that John saw was, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Now, from a worldwide perspective, that's always been the case. So since the beginning of the church, false religion has always put to death true believers in Jesus Christ. But this is specifically looking at the period of time in the Great Tribulation. So the people being killed here are basically tribulation saints who are putting their faith in Christ. Remember, it was given to the beast to make war with the saints, to overcome them and to kill them. And so this is a picture of false religion in that day. There's just this unquenchable zeal to exterminate Christians. Again, why so many people today, commentators today, are saying it has that strong Islamic element because what is their goal? It is to exterminate Christians. Okay, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Okay, so this is, we're going to look at the interpretation of Mystery Babylon here. So in verse 7, but the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you a mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition, and those who dwell on the earth, the unbelievers, will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not, and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not, and is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind that they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, for God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. That pretty well settles it, right? Any questions on the interpretation? Okay. So we'll look at the interpretation, and this is where I won't really draw pictures, but I'm gonna I'll write something up there to make it simple. Okay, so first let's go through it slow. You've seen the whole thing, and by the way, right now we are just focused on the religious part of Babylon. Remember, the original Babylon under Nimrod was a religious economic venture. Remember Nimrod, whose name means, by the way, we will rebel, when he built the city of Babylon, the way that he employed people was for them, they were going to build a tower. And the purpose of the tower was religious. It was so that they could worship the host of heaven. So the host of heaven is going to be worshipped, but yet it's an economic venture because it employed all the able-bodied men, possibly the women in town, because the tower was to, as they said, reach up into the heavens. In other words, the plain of Dura, or the plain of, the Shinar, the plain of Shinar, is kind of a flat plain. There's no mountains there, which is why, by the way, Nebuchadnezzar had the hanging gardens of Babylon. In other words, he built hills in the city of Babylon so that he could have, he wanted fake mountains so that he could put vegetation on to beautify the city. So the tower was going to be like a mountain in order to, the purpose being so that they could worship the host of heaven. Typically when I used to teach Revelation 17, and I think I will probably mention this, so I'll get through the interpretation first, and then I'll let you know what not legend, but what secular history has to say about the original Babylon and the Babylonian system which we see today. I used to have 32 pages on that, and I'm going to kind of boil all that down to half hour, 45 minutes. Okay.
I just have one more quick question.
Sure.
Wasn't there a prior Nimrod who was a great hunter?
This is a Nimrod I'm referring to in Genesis chapters 10 and 11.
Okay, I thought that he was prior to 9 or 11, but it's
No, he is the first event after the flood. The first
And he was a hunter, right?
Yeah, but he was, and matter of fact, let me go through the interpretation here, and then I'm going to tell you about Nimrod, what we know of him from secular history, and his wife, okay? But let me just go through the rough interpretation here first so that you have an idea of what the passage says. Then we'll see why you'll understand a lot of the what denominations and churches do, why they still do them today, okay? In other words, why we have Christmas trees, why we have Yule logs, why we have things like that, because they all go back to Nimrod. All the religions of the world, you know, the mystery religions, the mother-child cults all around the world, all have their origin in Babylon, and they're worshiping the same thing. But let me go through this first, and then I'll show you how it developed. Stuff that the Bible doesn't say. It's extra biblical information, but it will help you understand what's happening here in Revelation 17. So first it says in verse 7, "But the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you a mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns." Okay. First of all, the beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend to the bottomless pit and go to perdition. Okay. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel. Okay. First of all, the beast is an empire, and it's a person. And sometimes commentators will argue, well, it's either a person or it's a kingdom. But in ancient times, when you talked about a king or a kingdom, the word is the same. I believe it's basileia in Greek. And what it has to do with, a king was identified with his kingdom. So you talk about by the way, that's why some translations of your Bible say that we will be kings and priests, and other translations say we will be a kingdom of priests, because it's the same word. So it means both things. If you looked at ancient Babylon, if you said Nebuchadnezzar, you meant ancient Babylon. If you mentioned Cyrus, you meant the Medo-Persian Empire. If you said Alexander, you would mean the Greek Empire. So during the Antichrist's reign, when you say Antichrist, whatever his name is going to be, it is synonymous with his kingdom. So first of all, it's going to mention about the fact, we'll describe this riddle as a person first. Okay, so the beast that you saw was and is not. In other words, he's going to be, he's a person. He's going to be assassinated, or he's going to die of a mortal head wound. In other words, he was, now he is not, and then he is again. In other words, he's going to appear to rise from the dead. And it says, the people of the earth, in other words, all those who don't have the seal of God on their foreheads, they're going to marvel and they're going to follow the beast. Who is like unto the beast, as it says in Revelation 13. So it depicts his death and resurrection. In other words, he is counterfeiting what Jesus Christ did. People, Christians have always said, our Savior died, he was buried, and he rose again from the dead. During this era, followers of Antichrist are going to say, big deal, so did Antichrist. Well, by the way, they're not going to call him Antichrist. They're going to call him whatever God calls him a beast. That's how he's referred to in Revelation. But he's going to have a name. It's just that we don't know what that name is. All we know is that in Hebrew or in Greek, it's going to add up to 666, 666. And we can't know that because there's a multitude of names that can add up to 666. So the beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. This, as an empire, first of all, during John's era, Rome was in existence. So you have Rome. Okay, then Rome kind of disappears from the scene. It is not. The Roman Empire is shattered. I think I mentioned this in this class, the nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty is a riddle that describes the demise of the Roman Empire, how it fell, and then talked about all the king's horses, all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And it refers to people like Charlemagne, Napoleon, and I'm just picking just ones off the top of my head, Kaiser Wilhelm, Adolf Hitler, the Third Reich, all of that has to do with putting together again the revived, putting together again the Roman Empire. But now it just seems to be coming together by itself. For instance, the nations in Western Europe have come together of their own accord ever since the 50s. Okay, and so now, like in the 70s, there wasn't yet 10 nations, and so they said when they reach 10 nations, that'll be the revived Roman Empire. But at the moment, right now, there's like 15, 18 nations in the European Economic Community, but on their flag, it's a blue flag with 12 stars in a circle. So it's something more than just, Western Europe. It's going to be much greater than that, because remember, Rome circled the entire Mediterranean. So in other words, and I've mentioned before that the eastern leg of the Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years longer than the western leg. In other words, the western leg kind of like died out in the 400s, 400 AD, in that era, whereas the eastern leg didn't fall until 1400. Constantinople was conquered by the Turks in the 1400s or early 1500s. So in other words, the Constantinople, the eastern leg of the capital of the empire, it lasted a full 1,000 years longer than the West. So we in the West, we're very provincial. We like to say that the best part of the Roman Empire was to the West. But if you lived in the East, you would be saying, well, we lasted 1,000 years longer than you did. So when the revived Roman Empire is rebuilt again, when it revives, it's going to involve what was originally the old Roman Empire, East and West. So Rome was, and then it was not. Like, for instance, there is no Roman Empire now. But under Antichrist, it's going to rise again. Okay, so there'll be revived Rome. And when I say Rome, I don't mean the city, I mean the Roman Empire. So it says, the beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. Okay, so when you refer to it as a man, when Antichrist dies, he ascends out of the bottomless pit. And it's at that point when he is fake resurrection. During that time, a lot of commentators say that he will be possessed by a very powerful demon, and some commentators say that he will be possessed by Satan himself. John MacArthur says a very powerful demon, but I'm of the opinion that if Judas was possessed personally by Satan, I personally believe that Antichrist will be possessed by Satan also. And my reason for that is because since Antichrist is going to be personally worshipped, I just believe that Satan would want to be indwelling Antichrist, so he's receiving that worship directly also. That's my opinion. Okay, those who dwell on the earth will marvel. In other words, first of all, they marvel that the Roman Empire has basically been resurrected from the dust, but also that the leader of the Roman Empire, he's killed and he is revived, and the people are just going to marvel that this guy has come back from the dead. He has conquered death. In other words, that's what they're going to be seeing. And by the way, if the two witnesses have their ministry in the first half of the tribulation period, it's during this time that the beast, he's going to kill them, they're going to rise from the dead. So there's going to be a few resurrections going on at that time. And whether the two witnesses are resurrected first or Antichrist rises first, you're going to see if God's doing a resurrection, there's going to be a satanic counterfeit right at that point too, depending upon where you put those two witnesses. So the ones who marvel are the ones who, of course, who are not written in the book of life, from the foundation of the world. From the foundation of the world is equivalent to before the beginning of time. In other words, it's the plan that God had when he took all of us who have put our faith in Jesus Christ. God had already predestined us to be conformed to his image before the creation even began. It is impossible for us to fall, in other words. If I can use that, it's a Calvinist term, the perseverance of the saints. God is saying that if you're a true believer, you will persevere. So like if you're a person who receives the Lord during the tribulation period, you will persevere. In other words, you will suffer greatly, but the Holy Spirit will giving you the power, and you will persevere through all the persecutions to the point of death. Okay. So here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Okay, this is going to refer to all of world history. Okay, it's going to go way, again, most commentators, or a lot of commentators, like to say it's referring to the 7 mountains of Rome. But the passage itself is going to tell you that goes beyond that, because it says the 7 mountains, not only are they 7 kings, there's 7 kingdoms. Again, king and kingdom being the same word in Greek. So some commentaries you'll read, they're going to list a number of Roman Caesars. And they're just going to, and you get some commentaries, you can read who the Caesars are, or you can read about the 7 hills of Rome that Rome is built on. But I prefer actually what John MacArthur and actually John Walvoord, what they state. It's much greater than that. And so what you have here, it talks about the seven kings, the 7 mountains. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. So there's 7 mountains or 7 kings. 5 have fallen. Again, against the woman is sitting. In other words, throughout world history, again, we're talking about Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. Notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 have fallen. Okay. When John is writing this, these 5 empires have already come and gone. You can see how this just falls into the natural interpretation of the passage here. 5 have fallen, 1 is. Okay, so the 1 is that is at that point. Here's a fallen, and then the 1 that is Rome itself. It was the empire in John's day, and then it says 1 is yet to come. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. All right, the 1 that's going to come is number 7, and it's going to be revived Rome. And why, for instance, would we call it revived Rome? If we go to Daniel chapter 2 and you look at the the picture of the big statue, and it mentions, when it talks about the Roman Empire, it talks about the legs of iron. When it talks about in the future about the revival of that particular kingdom, the iron represents the Roman Empire. The revived form of that empire is the iron, in the feet, in other words, in the toes, mixed with miry clay. So in other words, this revived kingdom is going to have a lot of the characteristics of the sixth kingdom, but yet it's going to be different. It's going to be held in a different type of confederacy. In other words, it's going to be loosely connected, but I'm going to go ahead and use that as an opportunity to talk about what that might mean, okay? Say John MacArthur, Chuck Missler, a number of Bible commentators mention this. So I think it's important to mention this. So let me kind of like break off here as we talk about the revived Roman Empire. What form will it take? And this is where it gets kind of spooky. So we're going to go back to where Nebuchadnezzar has his vision. We're just going to look at the portion of the empire that talks about Rome and revived Rome. And then we'll go back to Revelation, because the seventh empire is going to turn into an eighth, but it's a part of the seventh. So in Daniel chapter 2, around verse, I'm going to read about 42. And there's this big statue. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar made it of gold. And when, remember, this is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's a result of having this vision. Nebuchadnezzar wanted the head of gold himself to last forever. And so he made this 90-foot statue of gold and wanted everybody to worship it. But in the vision, it was only a head of gold, and Daniel himself said that you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. Okay, so that was the first empire. So we're going to skip down to this portion of it right here and just the interpretation phase of it. So in verse 40, let's start with verse 41. So in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41, Daniel's giving the interpretation of the statue that was the head of gold, the arms and chest of silver, the belly of brass, okay? Going through the successive empires, starting with Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then, of course, then revived Rome. I guess I could put the medals up there, but it's pretty easy to follow. Let me go ahead and do that. Okay, as far as Daniel 2 is concerned, say to the end of the section there, Babylon is gold, the head of gold. Medo-Persia is silver. Greece is brass. And Rome is iron. And then revived Rome is iron, mixed with clay. It's really miry clay, which I probably should have written up there because it's going to become important. Okay, so it says in verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. The King James is actually more accurate here because they're just translating it the way it is. The kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they, okay, now here's the key right there. You notice it uses a personal pronoun. It says they. I wish I had a King James here, but it says they, okay? As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men. So that phrase right there, they will mingle with the seed of men. But they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Okay? So you have that key phrase there. They will mingle with the seeds of men during this period of the revived Roman Empire. Hold your place here and flip back to Genesis chapter 6. Yes. Yeah. Now I can, by the way, I can take this all the way through Antichrist himself, but I don't think I'll have time. Let's see.
Yeah, I know.
Not here right now, but they're okay. Okay. The reason why I can present this is, first of all, David Guzik believes this, and our commentator here, Dr. John MacArthur, believes this. So at least in chapter 6, MacArthur believes this. Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum believes this part, but he doesn't believe that they'll come back. But we'll just let the text itself say what it says. So it came to pass, Genesis chapter 6, verse 1, came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, okay, that the sons of God, that's B'nai Ha-Elohim, saw the daughters of Adam, or men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. So when it talks about the sons of God back at this point right here, the sons of God in the Old Testament are identified as angels. Okay? I'm not going to go through the extensive proof and refutation of those people that say that angels can't cohabit with women, because when Jesus talks about that, what Jesus is saying is they're not supposed to. They weren't designed for it, but it doesn't mean that they didn't do it. But I'm not going to go through all the proofs and all that stuff, because we don't have time.
These are fallen angels, right?
These would be fallen angels. In other words, these are angels who did not keep their first estate. In other words, when they rebelled with Satan, there's one word in the Greek that's used, by the way, when we're going to, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, we are waiting for our clothing from heaven. In other words, our bodies right now are described as being like tents, and we are waiting for our house. So picture yourself, your body is a tent. You know how flimsy tents are, and you're waiting for your house. Your house is your resurrection body. In other words, you're waiting for your glorified, indestructible body. So this one Greek word, oikoterion, is used 2 times in the New Testament. It has to do with like that glorified state. One place where it's used is where when the angels kept not their first estate. In other words, they literally like disrobed their glory. What we're waiting to put on, they took off. For the purpose that they wanted to cohabitate. In other words, they want to have sexual relations with the daughters of Adam. Okay, so in picture, there's a time in history, and if you wonder why did God have to destroy the entire earth during the flood and have it be so devastating that he buried that ancient civilization under miles of sediment? Why did God have to so totally cover the earth and have the flood last for so long in order to get rid of the civilization? What was going on before the flood?
Genetic problem.
There was a genetic problem. And when you look at Genesis chapter 6, also, when it talks about Noah, it says Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. The word for perfect is the word for sacrifice. It has to do with him being genetically pure without defect. In other words, Noah was perfect in all his generations. From Adam to Noah, he was perfectly 100% human, is the way that would be interpreted. So I don't have time to actually demonstrate and prove that from the scripture, to really build a solid case. I just want to let you know what it's a minority opinion, but it's a very strong minority opinion. The general opinion is, that the sons of God were the sons of the line of Seth. They were the good guys. But of course, if they're the good guys, if they're the religious guys, what are they doing marrying the sons of Cain? Because they're not supposed to marry unbelievers. And then, of course, it says nothing about the daughters of Seth. That particular theory, which is dominant in the culture today, in Christian circles, totally falls apart under examination. So it specifically states the sons of God, referring to angels, saw the daughters of Adam. specifically states the daughters, not the sons, but the daughters. In other words, there were no daughters of Cain marrying the daughters of Seth. There wasn't any of that. It talks about the sons of God marrying marrying the daughters of Adam. They took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And Jehovah said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. God is saying, he isn't saying your lifespan is going to be 120 years. What he's saying is the flood's coming in 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward. And the key is, there were giants on the earth in those days. In other words, what days? The days before the flood. And also afterward. After what? After the flood. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And then that's when God starts talking about the wickedness on the face of the earth. So the story of the Nephilim, it's in every culture of the world. They're not called Nephilim, that's the Hebrew term. If you have a modern translation, it will say Nephilim. That's because they don't know how to translate it, so they took the Hebrew. It's the Hebrew word nephal is the Hebrew word. It's a Hebrew verb meaning to fall. Nephilim is a plural, and it's talking about a group of individuals who were fallen. Fallen from what? Well, in the Greek translation, if you have a King James, and the New King James, it says giants are on the earth. So that word giants is that Greek word, is translated from the Greek word gigantes, which sounds like giants, but it doesn't mean giants. It means earthborn. So you got to figure, why would you have to distinguish these people as being earthborn in reference to what? Because if you think about it, I bet I could, everybody in this room, I would guarantee was probably born somewhere on the earth. So these giants, in other words, the gigantes, they were earthborn, as opposed to what? Being from heaven. So again, think of every culture in the world. When, by the way, when the Spanish conquistadors, they first came into Mexico and stuff like that, why were they so widely accepted? Because the Indians, they thought they were looking for white gods to come down from heaven. And they thought the Spanish conquistadors were them. In other words, they were expecting them. Every culture on the face of the earth, but I could just mention Greece in particular, has stories of the Nephilim. For instance, Hercules. Just use one. Hercules, Atlas. You run down the list. Zeus being the father of Hercules, he was the god from heaven. He came down and found a woman on earth who he desired, and the offspring was, of course, Hercules. And by the way, the Greek term is, these were in Greek mythology, these were the Titans. In other words, the offspring of the gods who came down and cohabited with the women on the earth, they were the Titans. So that term Titan is a Greek term, not referring to the Tennessee Titans, the football team, but referring to those people whose one of their parents was one of the quote-unquote gods. So Genesis says that they were fallen angels that came down and cohabited with women on the earth, their offspring being, in other words, not totally human, not totally angelic, but they were monstrosities. So again, any theory falls apart. The fact that a believer marries an unbeliever, your kids could be monsters. That's how Chuck Missler describes it. But it doesn't mean they're going to be a monstrosity. In other words, it's not going to, just because a believer marries an unbeliever doesn't mean that your children are going to be giants. And by the way, these were giants. There's stories of giants not only being 10 and 12 and 15 feet tall, but 25 and 30 and 40 feet tall. In other words, in the world before the flood, giganticism through all the species was the norm. In other words, seeing dragonflies with 3-foot wingspans, seeing cockroaches, 18 inches long. Giganticism was very predominant in the world before the flood. And so God says basically that the wickedness is so great that he has to destroy it. We can look at the book of Jude, the book of 2 Peter, for instance, and it's going to talk about the sin that was committed by these angels who were kept in a place, is the Greek word Tartarus, and is basically, in Greek mythology, it says Tartarus is far below Hades, as Hades is below the surface of the earth. But in reality, it's really a compartment in Hades itself, or at best maybe another word for Hades. And these angels are chained in darkness and they're awaiting for the judgment day. In other words, God literally removed them literally off the street. In other words, where they have no more contact with humanity. But it mentions that phrase that they will also be on the earth afterwards. So when we go back to Daniel chapter 2, by the way, Genesis chapter 3. Let me read the first prophecy of the Bible. Genesis 3:15. First messianic prophecy. I will put enmity between you and the woman, in other words, between the serpent and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. New Testament, of course, in the Old Testament, is the Hebrew word zarah. It says the seed of the woman is a singular seed. But it also says your seed and her seed. So but it says the seed for Satan is also a singular seed. Each one is talking about a singular seed. In other words, the seed of the woman will go against the seed of the serpent. Seeds being singular, the man Christ is going to go against the seed singular of the serpent. Again, using that as an argument. In other words, Christ will eventually follow the quote-unquote son of Satan. So the Nephilim theory goes all the way through Daniel, where it says they will mix with the seed of men, but they will not adhere. So in other words, when we are removed off the face of the earth, we look at the world and there's evil in the world, but we don't realize how much our presence on the earth is still restraining evil on the earth. And when the church is removed, literally the restrainer is removed, and now it would be at that time, according to that line of reasoning, that again the Nephilim will again be on the earth. They could reveal themselves as like aliens. Remember, we spent the last 60 or 70 years looking for extraterrestrial life. Satan is very accommodating. He will give us what we are looking for as a society, and lo and behold, that's why some commentators say, don't be surprised if the Antichrist claims to be an alien or has alien connections. But again, there's going to be a lot of possibly Nephilim on the earth in that day. They're not allowed on the earth now, but in that day there will be, when the church is not here. So it could be an alien race, who knows? Because remember, when we come back to retake the earth from Antichrist, remember, quite literally, we are coming from heaven down to earth in an invasion. So it's not out of reason to think that aliens, like came on the quote-unquote aliens, but not really aliens. They've like been here all the time. They're just not revealed right now. So it gets really eerie and stuff, but there's a lot of strong scriptural support. Right at the very end, by the way, you have to remember that Christ died for the sons of Adam. The Nephilim are not sons of Adam. They're half and half. So in other words, you got to be 100% human to qualify for Christ to die for you. And you'll notice at the very end, when we get to it, Revelation chapter 20, it says that Antichrist and the false prophet are taken alive and cast into the lake of fire. Okay. Now, I'll give you an argument later on in a couple of weeks where he was killed and then was given his resurrection body ahead of time. He'll be the first fruits of the second resurrection. Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum believes that. If you just take the scripture and follow it through, though, it appears that the Antichrist and the false prophet are cast with their mortal bodies into the lake of fire. Whereas every other human being on the face of the earth, those that are 100% human, get their resurrected, indestructible bodies fit for punishment in the lake of fire for all eternity before they're cast into the lake of fire, whereas Antichrist and false prophet do not. So that's kind of like a very long, arduous argument reduced to a very short argument about how Antichrist and false prophet could very well be Nephilim, which I probably lean in that direction myself. I can probably defend it pretty strong if I had more time, which we don't have. But if I'm wrong, the Antichrist will still be cast into the lake of fire. It just means that he died in in Isaiah chapter 14, was resurrected and cast in the lake of fire. It doesn't talk about his resurrection in the second resurrection, so that's inferred. Whereas in Revelation 20, it just talks about him being cast into the lake of fire. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. A lot of Revelation, Zechariah chapter 5 has to do with mystery religion, so we're actually going to look at what the mystery religion is. Okay, so here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings, or these are also 7 kings. So Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece. In John's day, which is like AD 95 to 100, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo, Persia, and Greece had already fallen by the wayside, and Rome was the empire of the day during John's. And in the statue, that was the iron. In other words, the legs of iron. So 5 have fallen, and 1 is, which is Rome, and the other is not yet come. The one that has not yet come is the revived Roman Empire, which is, of course, what we see. Bible commentators have been looking at current events, have been watching over the last several decades the Roman Empire slowly coming together. In other words, we're seeing the shadow of what's to come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. Okay? So he's going to come, he's going to continue for a short time. By the way, it's a personal pronoun again. Again, it refers to a person. In other words, the Antichrist. So remember, the person is identified with his kingdom. And you're really going to see this in just a few sentences, in a few verses. So the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. So the beast which was and is not is himself also the 8th. So this beast is also, again, referring to a person and a kingdom. He's of the 7th, but he's also going to be an 8th kingdom. So you figure, well, how does that work? So he's going to be also an 8th kingdom. Okay. During the first part of Daniel's 70th week, the person we call the Antichrist, Revelation calls him the beast, he is saying that he's going to be a world-renowned leader, all the way from the first seal. He's the one, remember, who signs a peace treaty with Israel, guaranteeing peace in the Middle East. In other words, and by the way, our whole lifetimes, I know, we have been watching, ever since Truman, Eisenhower, they've been trying to work out a peace in the Middle East. And it's only gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. There's been 4 major wars there. And every time Israel is getting ready to totally stomp, nobody does anything when Muslim nations attack Israel. But when Israel starts to win, then the world says, hey, we got to put a stop to this. And that's happened every single time. And so we finally get to a point where the Antichrist is going to guarantee safety for Israel, and that's the first seal. So that's in the revived Roman Empire, he becomes the undisputed world ruler at this point right here. When he when he is slain, or when he dies and is resurrected again, he is going to demand that the world worship him. And so it's kind of like during the Roman Empire, remember, they started off as a republic, and then the republic degenerated into Caesar worship. Well, once, it's kind of like the same thing here. He's like a well-respected world leader, totally anti-Christian, the perfect humanist, but when he's feigns his resurrection from the dead, he demands that the world worship him and him alone and know that they are worshiping him. In other words, he wants them to not, you don't have to be on drugs to worship him. He doesn't want religion in the way. He wants you to say, I am the person that you need to worship, not through any religious system. You know, we say that Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship. What Antichrist is looking for is people to have a relationship with him. That's what he is looking for. So you got to get religion out of the way. And so in Revelation chapter 17, that's why the religious system has to be destroyed. Antichrist uses it to get control of the world. But once he has control, religion is in the way, and he wants it out of the way. He wants the opiate of the people, so to speak, out of the way, so people will, in their, if you can call it their right minds, will fully of their own free will be worshiping Antichrist. And that's, of course, why I believe that Satan himself will possess Antichrist, because Satan has always desired worship. Remember the temptation in Matthew chapter 4 and in Luke? All the worlds of the kingdom, all the kingdoms of the world are mine to give to whomsoever I choose. Worship me. Satan desires worship, and he tried to seduce the Son of God into worshiping him. Not literally, to tempt Jesus into worshiping him. In other words, avoid the cross. I'll give you the kingdoms of the world right now. Worship me. That's all you got to do, and it's all yours. But of course, Christ turned it down. Remember, Jesus said, you shall, get thee behind me, Satan, you shall worship only Jehovah, and him only shall you worship. Okay. So anyway, the eighth kingdom is like a form of the revived, but now it's like a total dictatorship, like with Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar ruled with absolute authority. During this time right here, Antichrist will rule with absolute authority. So it's going to be revived Rome, but it's going to be in a, I don't know what to call it because the scripture doesn't call it anything, but it's going to be with Antichrist as the undisputed ruler. Whatever he says goes. There's no checks and balances. He has absolute authority, which is what he's looking for. Remember, Satan is the god of this world, and he wants everybody to obey him without question. So that's how he becomes the eighth, and it happens after the feigned death and resurrection of Antichrist. And it's at that time, of course, Satan is cast out of heaven. It's at that time that the religious system is going to be destroyed. So, and that's what we're going to read about here, although we don't get the exact time, but you can place it when you compare it with Zechariah and Revelation here. So it says the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. 1 hour is an expression to mean like for the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation period, these 10 kings will literally, the earth is going to be divided into 10 divisions or administerial areas of administration, and they will totally give their support to the beast. In other words, the worship of the beast. So they give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. In other words, these 10 kings, these 10 administrative kings under Antichrist, will make war with, of course, Christ and with the saints and overcome them. In other words, most believers in the tribulation period will be put to death. And those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. In other words, okay. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, Here's the interpretation of, like the beast coming out of the water, okay? The waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So remember back in Revelation 13, it starts off, then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So the interpretation. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Revelation 17:15. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, for God has put it into their hearts. In other words, God has himself, Jehovah himself, has put it in the hearts of these kings that they need to destroy the religious system, which is the harlot. God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. It's not referring to Rome, it's referring to Babylon. Okay, just very quickly I want to turn to Zechariah chapter 5 because it's describing this same thing about the time when the religious system falls out of favor with the world dictator of that day. If she's in Rome for a while, she's going back to Babylon where she has her roots. And that will be my perfect springboard to talk about mystery religion. So in Zechariah chapter 5, it's starting at verse 5, it's the vision of the woman in a basket. Okay. Zechariah chapter 5, starting at verse 5 all the way through verse 11. Then the angel who talked with me came out and said to me, lift up your eyes now and see what this is that goes forth. So I asked, what is it? And he said, it is a basket that is going forth. He also said, this is their resemblance throughout the earth. Here is a lead disc lifted up, and this is a woman sitting inside the basket. Then he said, this is wickedness. So this woman is wickedness. Remember, the mother of harlots, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And he thrust her down into the basket and threw the lead over its mouth. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and there were 2 women coming with the wind in their wings, for they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between the earth and heaven. So I said to the angel who talked with me, where are they carrying the basket? And he said to me, to build a house for it in the land of Shinar. The land of Shinar is the plain where the city of Babylon itself is built. So to carry it to the land of Shinar, when it is ready, the basket will be set there on its base. So in other words, right at the very end, when the religious system, in other words, all the priests and everything that control the ecumenical movement of the world, they will, if they're in Rome, if their headquarters are in Rome, they're going to Babylon because they're in disrepute. So they go to where they started, in Babylon itself. So that takes us back to Genesis chapter 10. So in Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11. Just want to read a couple of verses, but then I want you to see what God was doing, or actually what was happening after this happened here. If you want to read like the full story of this, there's a book that was quoted a lot, in times past, and the book was called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. He did the most to document the mystery religion that was pervasive over the face of the earth, and he did it through several cultures. And as I read, the account of Nimrod. Nimrod's going to be in Genesis chapter 10. Okay, just let me read. I'm just going to read. We're all familiar with the account of the Tower of Babel. Okay, but what I'm going to read is just the account of Nimrod in Genesis chapter 10. In verse 6, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raamah, Sabtika, and the sons of Raamah were Sheba and Dan. Cush begot Nimrod. By the way, Cush means black, and Nimrod means we will rebel. In other words, Cush, genetically speaking, his skin was black. Okay. Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Okay. Then it's going to talk about his kingdom, Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ur, and Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, that is the principal city. So it's just talking about what he built, but now I'm going to kind of like depart and go into the history of, in other words, the recollections from cultures around the world about what the world says about Nimrod back in that day, especially, cultures in the Middle East. Nimrod, as his name shows, his father was black, and Nimrod was most likely black also. And it says he began to be a mighty one on the earth. In other words, he was the first world dictator, and at that time, the whole world's population lived on the plain of Shinar. God had told Noah to scatter over the face of the earth and replenish the earth, fill the earth. But Nimrod and the people said, hey, we don't want to do that. There's wild animals out there. We're just going to stay right here. In fact, we're going to build a city with walls around it, and we're going to build a tower. So the tower is the religion. Remember, Jehovah said scatter around the earth, but now he's saying we're going to disobey God. We're going to stay here. So in just a few generations later, of course, there's this rebellion against God. So the city of Babylon is being built, and it has a wall. And if you look at ancient pictures of the gods and goddesses back then, when I get around to Nimrod's wife, I'll mention some of the goddesses like Diana and Astarte and stuff, and how they're pictured in ancient literature. So Nimrod was married. He's black, and he was married to a white blonde woman. Okay. Remember, this isn't Genesis, so like typically I'd mention, how do you get all the ethnic groups, or all the quote-unquote races out of just the sons of Noah? And the thing is, with the sons of Noah, all the genetic material that came from Adam and Eve is going to be in the three sons of Noah and their wives. And Adam and Eve were like 1.67% heterozygous, just like us, which means, if I can take, say, a potential newlywed couple, I'll take you two, if you don't mind the expression. I say potential because I don't know the future. It's possible, being 1.67% heterozygous, that if you were physically able, if you had over 25 trillion children, no two of them would be the same. In other words, the variability in your DNA is enough to have like 25 trillion, or actually it's 25 to 100 trillion children, and no two being genetically alike. In other words, there's almost like an infinite variety in your DNA. But to be more realistic, if it was somebody, if it was like two brown people, and when I say brown people, let's just say a person, just say a white person marries a black person. Say, okay, we have two sets. I'm just picking the extremes. They have children, okay. Then those children, okay, let's just say they have 10 or 15 children. In their DNA, most of them are going to be on the darker side. And like say, we're just going to start off with two families like that. God started off with 3 families after the flood, but we're starting off with 2 families. Let's just say each one has 10 kids, 5 boys, 5 girls from each one. Both of them have the DNA, in other words, the full spectrum of genetic change for dark skin and light skin. Say the mother's like Irish, blonde, blue eyes, or redhead, or something like that. And I'm only picking one trait. I'm only picking skin color because it's the one that you can see. And so they have their children. So like in the next generation, these children marry each other. And let's just say that we'll just pick one of those couples, okay? Remember, the children, both those children are basically brown. By the way, to dispel what people say, everybody in the world is the same color. Everybody is the color melanin, because that's the name of the gene. We're all melanin. It's just how much melanin is in your skin. How much of that protein is in your skin. If you have a lot of it, you're dark. If you don't have a whole lot of it, you're light. So we're all just different shades of melanin. The more that you have, the darker you are. But for these particular brown skinned people, by the way, 80% of the world is brown. Okay, so most likely Adam and Eve, they weren't blonde, blue-eyed white people, they were brown people with the DNA in order to come up with all what we call races. I prefer to say, God says ethnic groups, okay? Nations is the Greek word, it's the word ethnos for literally ethnic groups. And so these children have the genes for, say, being the whitest white to the blackest black. Okay, so let's say 2 of them get married, and both the wife and the husband both have this DNA structure, the whitest white and the blackest black. I mean, you can do that today in one generation. Now the children, when they marry, we got to have them have at least 10 kids, okay, in order to demonstrate this. One of those kids will be white. One of those kids will be black. And basically it follows like a bell curve. And let's just call this, the white side, or the least amount of melanin. This is the most amount of melanin, so we'll call that black. And so as you're going this way, they're progressively getting darker and darker and darker and darker. But usually in this range right here, we usually call that brown. And I notice here there's like a lot of white people in here. Some of you have, I know some of you had blonde hair at one time, some of you have dark hair, some of you have brown eyes, some of you have blue eyes. So a lot of you carry recessive genes, which are the lighter genes, and a lot of you carry some of the darker genes. It just so happens that most of the world is going to fall into this category right here. The world is typically 10% what we call black and 10% white. Worldwide, that's the ratio. It's always been that way. So anyway, Nimrod is going to marry a woman named Semiramis. She is a extraordinarily beautiful blonde, blue-eyed woman. Nimrod is black and Semiramis is white. How do we know that? Typically you go to Egypt and you see Isis, Horus, and I forget the other god, because I wasn't expecting to talk about this tonight. But anyway, you're going to see this, you're going to see the husband, the wife, and the son. And when the husband is put to death, Nimrod, it's going to be mother and son. So here's how mystery religion started. Nimrod starts the rebellion, and Nimrod is going to be killed. And tradition and culture says that Nimrod was killed by Shem. And when Nimrod was executed, his body was cut in pieces and sent out through what was then the world, the Babylonian area, as what would happen to anybody who stayed in false religion. So this is like after Babel and stuff like that. And so Nimrod is executed. Well, now Semiramis, who is the queen, and by the way, the legends of Semiramis were that she was considered so beautiful that it says men could be fighting and arguing and stuff, and when she came around, people would just stop what they were doing and they would just stare at her, as she would walk by. But she was as wicked as she was beautiful. Okay. Now, when Nimrod, her husband, died, her throne or her power was in jeopardy. She's still the queen, but now with King Nimrod being dead, her throne is in jeopardy. So what does she do? She claims that Nimrod visited her as a spirit, had sex with her, and she had a child. And in the scripture, like say for instance in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, that child is called Tammuz. So her offspring was Tammuz, sorry, 2 M's. You can look it up in a concordance. I don't have time to like turn to them, but this Tammuz was supposed to be the reincarnation or the rebirth of Nimrod. Okay, and he was like basically a white child. Okay, so Nimrod is black, Semiramis is white, and Tammuz is a light-skinned child. Okay. Now, by the way, when Nimrod was cut in pieces, if you go to according to Alexander Hislop and the 2 Babylons and other sources too, the Yule log, that everybody has, and the original origin of Christmas trees and all that stuff, and the Yule log. The Yule log was supposed to be a representation of one of the body parts of Nimrod, because Nimrod was represented as a tree. The tree was cut in pieces, and so everybody would burn a Yule log. That's a tradition that goes all the way back to Babylon. But not only Babylon, but literally when the cultures of the world scattered over the face of the earth, they all took these same things with them. So Semiramis, remember, she claimed she had, Nimrod visited her from the spirit world and impregnated her, so it was like a counterfeit of the virgin birth per se. And so you have now a full-grown woman, Semiramis, and you have Nimrod, her husband, but he's a baby. So now you have literally Semiramis holding the child, okay? And so whether it's Babylon, whether it's India, whether it's Japan. By the way, Roman Catholic priests, when they went to Japan for the very first time, were shocked with what they thought they saw was the Madonna and her child, because it was already there in China, it was in Japan, it was in India. I mean, you can get all the names for all of these where it was the mother-child. It's called the mother-child cult. All the way from Babylon, it was the mother-child cult. When it went to Egypt, Semiramis, the name became Isis. And her husband, I believe, was Horus, and I forget the name of Tammuz. But Tammuz was always represented as like a calf or a bull. But, well, Nimrod being a bull and Tammuz a calf, and usually a spotted calf, okay? So it gives new light when you look at the calf worship going on in the book of Exodus, chapter 32, with the golden calf. It was actually going back again to the worship of Tammuz, which again, who's Tammuz? But he was like the reincarnation or the rebirth of Nimrod. Okay, now let's talk about Nimrod himself. Before Nimrod was killed, it says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Well, ancient legend says that he really was a hunter, and the reason why you would see, like in a lot of ancient artifacts, is like a spotted bull and things like that. In Egypt, they have actually found spotted calves, representing Tammuz, and so like a fawn, like a deer fawn, they would be used to represent Tammuz because a fawn has spots, when they're young. Nimrod was a mighty hunter, but he was also incredibly strong, and so during the age of Nimrod, that's where they first started wearing crowns. And what Nimrod would do to demonstrate his strength is that he would wrestle bulls. And he would literally, to demonstrate his physical strength, he would take the bulls and he would break their neck. By himself, he would break their neck, wrestle them to the ground, and kill them with his bare hands. They would take the horns on a strip of rawhide and they would wear them around their head, and that was like the first crowns. So again, horns at that time started to represent political power, but also strength. And so the idea of crowns and horns started, in the earthly realm, started coming from Nimrod in those legends. So like, for instance, whether you go to Egypt, whether you go to Greece, whatever culture you want to pick, you'll find a mother, a Madonna and child, and you'll find the same exact legends. When Nimrod used to hunt, he used to hunt with leopards. Like in the Middle East, we hunt with dogs, hunting dogs here. In the Middle East, they used to hunt with leopards. Leopards have spots, and so like you would see spots. That's why the spotted calf, a fawn, representing Tammuz. That's why, and of course, being a hunter, like Nimrod would go out, he would hunt the wild game. Because remember, he was the protector of those in Babylon. They built walls around the city, not only to keep the people in, but to keep the wild animals out. And Nimrod would go out with a host, in other words, his original army, and they would hunt down the wild animals. And he would use leopards like we would use hunting dogs. And of course, leopards being, of course, incredibly fast, they would be able to run down the game that they're after. They would be able to kill it. So Nimrod became a mighty hunter. So not only was he a mighty hunter as far as his skill in taking down large prey, but then at that point, because he was isolating the people inside the city walls, he also became a dictator, and now he was also hunting the souls of men. He wanted to dominate them in every way, which is why the Tower of Babel and the new religion, which was opposed to God. In other words, back in that day, before Nimrod, it used to be said that the flood was so recent in everybody's memory that every time it rained, people were fearful unless they saw the rainbow or something like that to remind them, that the world was not going to be flooded. But they said that God was so close back then, literally it says like the sky was lowered, that God was close. They really viewed God as being close to the earth. So Nimrod had to rebel against that and come in with a new religious system. When he was killed, Semiramis built on that, saying that Nimrod had visited her, and so occultism and seances and stuff, speaking with the dead, originated with Semiramis, as she was constantly in contact with her husband, and then of course through those seances, whether it was real demonic messages and stuff, it gave her control of the world by proxy at that point, because Nimrod was really still in charge. In fact, he had come back, and Semiramis was just basically raising Nimrod again until he was old enough to take the throne again. So that's how the mother-child cult started. And then during the confusion in Babylon, what was going on was carried off as the 70 people groups went around the world. They carried this to literally all the destinations around the world. So like everywhere you go in the world, you see the mother-child cult anywhere you go. If you follow it religiously, you can trace it. Remember I had the empires down there? You can follow it from Egypt to Assyria to Babylon to, again, Neo-Babylon, the new Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome again. When Christianity came on the scene, and remember during the age of Pergamos, remember Satan's throne was there in the city of Pergamum? Well, during that era right there, when Christianity and the world were married together, Constantine, in order to get the empire to accept Christianity, started combining a lot of the pagan religions, the Babylonian mystery religions, with Christianity. Well, since there was Jesus and Mary, it was very easy to just substitute Semiramis and Tammuz as being Mary and the Christ child. And so very early on in Christianity, about 300 or 400 AD, you start having, during the age of Pergamum, you started having the mother-child cult being worshipped in the church also. But again, in all the other cultures around the world. Semiramis, by the way, her title, remember she was queen, her title was the Queen of Heaven. Now, if you look at what's Mary's title today? Queen of Heaven. Okay, and again, all around the world you see that same thing. So that's just kind of like in the nutshell. I didn't, you can trace it into Norway, and into Sweden, into Great Britain with the Druids. You can trace it, all the major cultures where you look at the mystery religions, you see this threesome: Baal, Asherah, and Tammuz. Tammuz is actually the Middle Eastern name. Diana, by the way, the goddess Diana is the Greek and the Asia Minor picture of Semiramis. And when you see ancient pictures of Diana, and it talks about in Daniel about the goddess of fortresses. If you look at the crown on Diana's head, it looks like a battlement from a castle with fortifications and everything on top. She is the goddess of fortresses. And again, going back to Semiramis after Nimrod was dead. Again, and you see that type of thing, again, all over the world. So that's kind of like really in the nutshell what you have with the mystery religion. And so it is still with us today. It is still practiced today. In Ezekiel and Jeremiah, it talks about people weeping for Tammuz, because Tammuz was basically, they celebrated his birth during the fertility season, during the growing season. At the very beginning, it would be a reenactment of the birth of Tammuz, where the new growth and everything would be coming out of the ground. And so it was at that time that they would bake cakes to Tammuz. And my wife, being former Catholic, oh yeah, we used to do that too in our church. The honey cakes and everything that they would bake. She had the names for them and all that stuff. But it's the same traditions that they did here was what they were doing in her church, back home. But it's the same thing, that God judges in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, where God is really getting ready to judge the people in Israel because they're weeping for Tammuz, because remember, Nimrod was killed, but he was reborn. And then there's great joy during the fertility season, the season of spring and rebirth, the season of Ishtar, Easter, where Easter comes from Ishtar, the god of, a Babylonian god. During that time, first there would be sorrow, and then there'd be rejoicing when the new growth came. And that came during this time when people all had their sex parties and all that stuff, all the temple rites, all the sexual orgies and everything that went on. Then there would be this new growth on the earth. And that's basically the story that basically went around the world. And that's why in whether it's Genesis or in the prophets or in Revelation, that's why mystery religion is called the mother of harlots. It's always related to harlotry. And in the scripture, every time you see spiritual prostitution, if you see spiritual prostitution or spiritual adultery, and if you say you start in spiritual adultery, you will end up in physical adultery as a general rule. If you start off in adultery, physical adultery, you will end up in spiritual adultery. They're so interconnected that God ties them together. So you'll see, like in the prophets, God almost makes them the same thing. He uses one to describe the other. And so that's mystery of religion. And every time you see it described, and remember when we talked about the church in Thyatira? It says that woman Jezebel cast into a bed to see who would commit adultery with her. Remember the doctrine of Balaam, the teaching of Balaam, the teaching of the Nicolaitans all said that sexual license was something that God wanted. And so God said he would judge her by casting her into a bed to see who would commit adultery with her. People were committing adultery, saying that it didn't really affect the spirit because the body was evil and different. So it was spiritual and it was physical. And remember, it was that church, that woman, who would be cast into great tribulation. So it was that church, the fourth church, that would literally go into the great tribulation. So that woman is kind of like a picture of a foretaste of the great harlot in the tribulation, but yet she's living in the church today. Remember, those 7 churches there was a dominant period where it was a dominant period in church history, but all 7 churches are alive with us today too. So that's kind of like the story of mystery religion. It's just a really watered down version, really vague. I didn't come up with names of all the gods and all that stuff, but we don't really have time for that. So that's kind of a picture of what is being destroyed. It started in Babylon, and so as it says in Zechariah chapter 5, verses 5 through 11, and then it's alluded to in Revelation chapter 17, she goes back to Babylon where she had her beginning, and it is at that point that God destroys her at the midpoint of the tribulation. One thing we need to note, the woman rides the beast. So in other words, the beast is supporting the woman. The woman can't function unless she has the support of the beast. But yet at the same time, the woman is riding the beast and she's controlling the beast. And the beast doesn't like that because he wants people to worship him and him alone. So like in Revelation 13, it's the beast at that point when he's resurrected, or he fakes his resurrection from the dead and steps into the temple of God, the rebuilt temple, and claims to be God and demands worship. It's at that point, as the image of the beast is being made, that the woman sees that she is no longer in favor. Satan does not want drugs. He does not want any of that stuff. He doesn't want sorcery. What he wants is people in their right mind to worship him. Say, yes, Satan, I choose allegiance to you. I will worship you. Just like you in your right mind chose Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. That's what Satan wants. And so for those who dwell on the earth, that is what they are going to do. And those that don't do that, of course, are going to be killed. And that's, of course, the whole thing, that's the whole background and drama that's going on in Revelation 17. So when you look at mystery religion and why it's a worldwide phenomena and why it's so easy to resurrect around the world, is because all around the world, the religion is there already. All they're doing is just putting the pieces together into one unified whole in other words, it's becoming much more open so that now the world is being commanded to worship. And of course, it's the religious system that tells everybody that they need to worship the beast. That's why the Antichrist needs her, but once he has control, he no longer needs her and he needs to destroy her. And it's at that point God is judging Babylon. And so in Revelation 17 and 18, first Tower of Babel is a religious system and an economic political system. So now in Revelation 17, the religious aspect is being destroyed in the midpoint of the tribulation. At the end of the tribulation, right during the 7th bowl judgment, the economic political system is judged. And that's when the city of Babylon itself is destroyed. In Revelation 17, it's the religious infrastructure around the world that is destroyed, so that all that is left is worship of Antichrist with no hindrances. You don't go through Hinduism, you don't go through Buddhism, you don't go through Islam. You go directly to Antichrist and say, I worship Antichrist. It's much like, there's a lot of people in the world of the occult, they call themselves Christian spiritualists. I was a Christian spiritualist, as a matter of fact. Seances, speaking with the dead and all that stuff. But then there were those people, and I did that in San Francisco. There were those people in San Francisco under Anton LaVey. They just got rid of all the middlemen and they just worship Satan. It says, why go through all the middlemen? Let's just worship Satan. And so there was the first church of Satan, of course, was in San Francisco, not too far from the church that I attended, the Christian spiritualist church. It's like flaming snowflakes. It's an oxymoron. But of course, I was blinded at that time. So you get rid of all the middlemen and all that stuff, and you just go and you go to the source. You worship Satan directly, and that's what Satan wants. He wants everybody to openly acknowledge him as Lord, and not go through all the religious veneers and colors. Joanna Michelson, she wrote a book called The Beautiful Side of Evil. And she talked about how Satan will actually get people to worship him, and they'll do it through white witchcraft, through sorcery, through like what seems like beautiful things like a reincarnation, having really good experiences with the spirits and stuff like that, seeing the light and oh, it's just so beautiful, I want to be a part of that. And then once you're in, once he's got you, then his true nature comes out, and then you see the wickedness, the wicked part of it, and how evil it is. And then all of a sudden you find yourself not only being depressed all the time, but you find yourself being suicidal too, and wanting to kill yourself. And then of course, if you actually try to get out of the system, then of course then the spirits themselves actually go out and they themselves try to kill you. Okay. That's in the world of the occult, that's common. And of course, being in the Christian church, you know, we're not real familiar with that, and that's the way we want to keep it. We just want to just realize that Revelation 17 is basically, it describes it, it's a worldwide phenomenon, and it's going to end in the middle of the tribulation period. Any questions on Revelation 17 so far?
I want to back up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Who killed Nimrod and why?
Tradition says in several cultures that it was Shem. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. If you take the Bible chronologically and literally, you realize that Shem was alive. He died after Abraham died.
He was the first one to take off, right? He says, I'm going.
No, Shem was the one that, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the lineage for the Messiah is going to come through Shem. Well, he was, there's even traditions, that say that Shem was the Melchizedek, in the Old Testament. There's a lot of, there's a lot of support for that, a lot of arguments against it and stuff. But because he was a follower of God, and Nimrod being a descendant of Ham, he rebelled against God. So when the rebellion got so great, Shem killed him with a sword and then cut him in pieces. And he did it because Nimrod was leading many people away from the one true God. In other words, saying, don't worship the God who sent the flood. Worship the host of heaven. Worship those deities. In other words, he was calling the demonic spirits deities. He said you needed to worship them, and then of course you needed to worship me. When Nimrod died, he was deified, and Semiramis herself claimed that she was the mother of God.
And he came from Ham?
Yeah, he was the grandson of Ham.
And Ham is Egypt, right?
No. Ham gave, one of Ham's son was Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the Hebrew name for Egypt. So back in Genesis chapter 10, it'll go through the descendants of Ham, and then it's going to, Canaan, Mitzrayim, there's going to be 4 sons there. In other words, where that started. And it says Nimrod, of course, being... you have to realize that Cush himself was already in rebellion. It started with Ham, but Cush became more rebellious, and then so that he himself named his son, we will rebel. So in other words, with the birth of Nimrod as a little boy, Cush had already planned for his son to rebel. So, any other, I don't know if that answers your question or not. Okay. Any other questions on Revelation 17? Because when we go through Revelation 18, 19, we'll do it fairly quickly next week. A lot of you will have to hear it on, you'll have to see it on tape. Revelation 18 we'll probably cover fairly quickly, but it's going to be, in fact, we'll get into it right now. It's going to be the destruction of the political economic system. And earlier commentators in the 60s and 70s are going to say that it's describing the destruction of Rome, okay, the city of Rome. More modern commentators taking the Bible more literally and then noticing, of course, that ancient Babylon is being rebuilt, and also noticing that when Babylon fell the first time, it was never destroyed. The way it's described in Revelation, the way it's described in Jeremiah and Isaiah and various other prophets. It talks about Babylon being destroyed, never to be rebuilt again, the building materials to never be used anywhere else. It's a complete and total annihilation of the city of Babylon. Even in the millennium, it's like a fenced off area. It's literally like a prison place for demonic spirits and stuff like that. Unclean spirits will be basically kept there. It's just going to be the one desert area in the millennial kingdom. It's just going to be. It's like the prison for the millennium until the Great White Throne Judgment. At the end of the millennium. So. That's what you have to sort of look at when you look at the city area of Babylon itself. Babylon was never really destroyed in the past. When Cyrus the Mede conquered the city of Babylon, the way that he conquered the city was he conquered Babylon without a fight. Babylon was not destroyed, it was taken over. And the way that he did it was that Cyrus and the Medo-Persian army was on the outside of Babylon, and they were trying to figure out, how do we get in the city of Babylon? Babylon at that time, it was considered an impregnable city. It had a wall around it. I'm kind of simplifying it, I'm just making it a square. And right through the center of it flowed the Euphrates River. So it was approximately 15 miles on a side. The walls were 300 feet high. They were literally wide enough to raise 6 chariots abreast. So it got a 300-foot high wall. And then every several hundred yards or feet or something like that, there were battlements that were 100 feet higher than the outer wall. So in other words, if you went to the top of the battlements, you're looking down 400 feet on the enemy below. And the walls, again, they were like over 100 feet thick. It was a massive edifice. Remember, the hanging guards of Babylon are inside. They had areas to grow crops. So in other words, they had a food supply. Nebuchadnezzar's palace alone, the walls of his palace were 135 feet thick. Can you imagine walking into a house and the walls are 135 feet thick? In other words, that's protection. So they have all the waters that they have, so in other words, and with those walls, they were considered impregnable. And at the time, they were the world empire of the day, but they were on the wane at that time. And remember, Babylon was becoming self-complacent at that time. Daniel was an old man, and so they spent a lot of their time in parties and stuff like that because, again, they were considered impregnable in that city. So Cyrus, with his army on the outside, is trying to figure out, how do I siege this city? How do we conquer this city? So anyway, there were two men from the Babylonian army that were disgraced, Darius and Gadatas. They were kicked out of the Babylonian army, and they were very upset with the Babylonians. So basically they went over to the Medes and the Persians, and they showed them how they could conquer the city of Babylon from within, not without. So what Cyrus did was, up here, the river's flowing this way. Up here, Cyrus built a dam, okay? He dammed up the river, and then he redirected the river around the city. In other words, he built a channel. Realize this takes time. He built another river channel around the city, plus damming it up, so that the river part going through the city dried up. Now remember, as the river's going through, you have to figure there's massive brass bars and gates going down into the river. Well, when the river level drops low enough, the the Medo-Persian army marched underneath, the gate, the gate bars and everything. They marched into the city at night while Babylon was still celebrating. And we know about that celebration, right, in Daniel chapter 5. That's, when the handwriting on the wall, many, many tekel upharsin, your kingdom has been found and weighed and sufficient has been given over to the Medes and the Persians. Okay, remember Belshazzar at that point? It says in King James, if you like translations, it says that when he saw the handwriting on the wall, he said literally that one knee smote against the other. Okay, and literally it says that his loins were loosed. That literally means that he messed his pants when he saw that. It says God is one who literally loosens the loins of kings. Okay, so the Medo-Persian army marched in and they took over the city without a fight. Babylon was never destroyed. What happened to Babylon? Because remember, even in the New Testament times, Peter is writing his epistle, First Peter, from Babylon. There's still a lot of Jews in the city at that time, and Babylon, kind of like when other cities were being built, trade routes changed and all that stuff, people just started moving away because businesses moved away, so the city became a ghost town. And then over time, it was buried in the sand. It was never destroyed, it was only conquered, but never destroyed. The scriptures talk about Babylon being destroyed with a great ball of fire and burning forever and ever. And that has not happened yet. So Revelation chapter 18 is a description of how Babylon is going to finally be judged by God, and it's going to happen during the seventh bowl. During the major earthquake, it's going to be flattened, and then it's going to be cremated. And it says the merchants of the earth are going to stand on the outside weeping at the destruction of the city, not because of their love for the city, because of the wealth that they derived from the city. And we'll talk about that next week, okay? Because when we talk about that, the rejoicing that goes on in heaven with the destruction of Babylon is going to precipitate the second coming of Christ. So I want to end with, I'm going to turn to Revelation chapter 16. I'm going to read the sixth bowl. I want you to see, because Revelation 17 and 18, it gives you background information of what happens during the seventh bowl. So as I read the seventh bowl, I'm going to skip over the background information and go right into what happens next chronologically. So here's the sixth bowl. The seventh bowl. So the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. Now the great city was divided into three parts. That's Jerusalem. And by the way, in this earthquake, God is reconfiguring the earth, getting it ready for the millennium, making the surface of the earth kind of like what it was like before the flood. Knocking down the mountains, getting rid of the islands, and making the earth much more habitable. In other words, there won't be all these mountain ranges and deserts and stuff. The whole world will be a lush green place where people can live anywhere in the world. The cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Okay, we read about that in Revelation 18 when it's talking about specifically about the city. Every island flees away, and it's talking about how the destruction is occurring. Then you go to Revelation chapter 19. There's a rejoicing going on in heaven, and then we go to verse 11. And it talks about the rejoicing that Babylon has been destroyed, and then it talks about us getting ready to retake planet Earth. Okay, so the next chronological scene after Revelation chapter 16, the end of the chapter, is Revelation 19, verse 11. Now I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, And in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire. Again, it's talking about heaven being open and us getting ready to come to invade the planet. So chronologically, you go from Revelation 16 at the end of the chapter, the seventh bowl, all the way to Revelation chapter 19, verse 11. Revelation 17 and 18 is the background information that details specifically how mystery religion and the Babylonian economic system and political system is utterly destroyed. Once that has been utterly destroyed, then Christ comes back and then destroys the armies of the earth, because that's all that's left. Okay, and then we'll look at 18, but then we'll go into the second coming itself next week. So that basically takes us to the end of our time. Is there any quick questions before I close? You're making me thirsty. Okay, that's okay. Okay. Is that Gatorade?
Yeah.
Okay. University of Florida. They invented Gatorade. Okay. No questions? Then I'm going to go ahead and close this in prayer, and we'll go ahead and leave. And for you students, are you guys leaving? You're leaving on Thursday. You're just going to miss this class. Okay. You all know your homework assignment and all that stuff. It's due in 2 weeks. So you realize you're going to have 3 papers due in the same week. Okay. Not a problem, right? Well, 2 for you, but 3 and 3 for you two.
2 classes? Is it 2 weeks from tonight, Thanksgiving?
It'll be 3 weeks in,
Yeah.
I guess. Well, we're meeting next week. It's just that 3 of the students
Following
won't be
week
here.
after that is Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
The next week is the
Yeah.
Wednesday class.
Okay, that's correct. I'll announce all that stuff next week to those that are here. Blessed Heavenly Father, we would just pray that as we look into your grace and truth, give us wisdom to chronologically put all of this together. Lord, help it purify our lives as we seek to be pleasing to you in Jesus' name. Amen.